I'm Fred McMurray, and this is Cargo Chronicles. Today, we've got an awesome new guest, Edwards. Sorry about that. Simple name, and I screwed it up. Of Gallagher. You're the Senior Vice President of Transportation for Gallagher.
Yes. Yes.
So tell our watchers, listeners about Gallagher and how they help the transportation logistics industry.
Absolutely. So, yes, my name is Mike Edwards, Senior Vice President of Transportation, Arthur J. Gallagher. Arthur J. Gallagher is one of the top three largest insurance brokers in the entire world. We're a publicly traded company. We operate in virtually every continent, I believe, except for Antarctica. We joke around that we'd probably go after Antarctica if there were more policyholders there. But transportation is a huge business for us. Our transportation vertical is one of the largest in the world. We manage over $2 billion in trucking and logistics premium. I've been in the business for 18 years. I only specialize in truck insurance and logistics. I am also a faculty instructor with the Risk and Insurance Education Alliance, formerly the National Alliance for Insurance Education and Research. I am one of the only insurance agents in the country that teaches advanced truck insurance as a CE course. I absolutely love this business.
You're highly sought after as a party guest, aren't you?
I'd like to think so. I have a lot of passion for this business, and I have a lot of passion for parties. So who doesn't want a party, Fred?
I there's always the insurance reasons not to party.
Yeah. Liquor liability is usually insured. It's usually covered on a standard general liability policy. So make sure it's not excluded.
Okay, all right. So, um, there is one question that I saw as I was doing some research, and I'd like you to, I guess, tell us about it. You won the Dick Jones Award for Outstanding Customer Service to the Trucking Industry.
Yes.
A, who is Dick Jones?
Yes.
B, what did you have to do to win this award?
Yeah. Yeah. So the Association of Bi-State Motor Carriers is an organization in Port Newark. They represent the interests of the intermodal trucking community in the second largest port in the country. It is an organization that represents trucking companies, intermodal, steamship lines, terminal operators, insurance brokers, intermodal equipment providers. I've been a member of the Bi-State Association for many years, almost 18 years now. And there were only two agents in the history of the Bi-State's 25-year history that have won that award. I was one of them. The other was my former partner, Mike DeStasio, who very tragically passed away recently. But between the two of us, we are the only two agents to have won that award. Dick Jones has been a member of the Bi-State for many, many years. He's an amazing, amazing guy. He has supported Port Newark in the intermodal trucking industry as well as the Bi-State has. And in general, what I've done to really earn that, I've always advocated for the trucking industry, and intermodal has always been my sweet spot. It's always been my bread and butter. It's always been a passion for me. I love intermodal. I love watching the containers and the RTG cranes and the straddles operating all around. And I've advocated for the business for a long time, and the Bi-State acknowledged that, and I'm very humbled to have won that award many years ago.
2019, I believe. Was I too far?
2019, yeah, about 7
Ah,
years ago.
well, two in the history, and you got one of them. That's pretty
Yeah,
awesome, dude.
I'm pretty excited about it.
All
So,
right, so let's talk about the transportation trucking industry.
yes,
In your mind, what so most people seem to be concerned about fuel prices.
yeah,
Okay. That's a huge impact. But since we're talking insurance today
sure.
and trucking industry or transportation industry, outside of fuel, what would you say is the number one issue in your mind going on in the trucking industry today?
Sure. So by far, the number one issue in the nation's supply chain in trucking is the race to the bottom mentality of freight rates. And that is being driven by a lack of broker liability. Trucks move in one of two ways. You're a customer and you hire a trucking company to move the freight for you, or you hire a freight broker to hire a trucking company to move the freight for you. 20 years ago, freight brokers represented 6% of the entire nation's freight. Today, it's close to 30%, and some people believe on certain days, brokers are moving 50% of the nation's freight. And let's understand what that means. It means that trucking companies are not naming their rates. Freight brokers who are hiding behind liability, who are not held accountable, are naming the rates, and they're pitting truckers up against each other. And they're not picking the safest carrier, they're picking the cheapest carrier. And there's a huge contradiction in this industry. We as society expect trucking companies to be safe. We expect them to buy new equipment or hire owner operators who have new equipment. We expect them to pay top wages. We expect them to pay a lot of rent for where they're operating. We expect them to put cameras and ELDs in the trucks and maintain their vehicles with brand new tires and brake pads. But you can't name your rates. You can't take all those expenses and pass it off to the customer because the rates are being dictated by brokers. And brokers are not accountable for anything. And the reason why brokers are not accountable goes back to a 32-year-old congressional bill called the Federal Aviation Authorization Administration,
Mm-hmm.
F4A. It's a little known bill that nobody really even knows about in trucking. But for 32 years, F4A has shaped our nation's supply chain. It basically states that no two states, no state at all, can enforce a price change over a route. New Jersey cannot tell California that for every trailer that comes into New Jersey, we're going to charge $25. And somehow the courts have interpreted that you can only sue a trucking company or a driver. You cannot sue a freight broker because, as the bill states, federal law preempts state law. So because you can't, from a federal standpoint, sue a broker, that means you cannot take a case and bring it in a state court and go after them.
Okay, so one question. And you use the idea of New Jersey can't charge California. Don't worry, California is going to start charging everybody to bring stuff in. It's what they do. But if something is staying, and from usually Supreme Court will use the whole interstate commerce doctrine.
Mhm.
So if something is being shipped within a state, so it's not going between states, is it still is uh, 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 the
F4A.
FA4, yeah,
Yeah.
F4A, is that still in effect?
So F4A is very flexible in how it's interpreted. Phil Murphy, the governor of New Jersey, tried to enforce this bucket truck initiative where every trailer going into a yard, a warehouse, must pay $1, and then it ended up becoming a $2, a two bucket truck. So I would say that based on him trying to do that, he definitely tried to push the envelope on what F4A can and cannot do. If you read F4A, it very clearly states that states cannot enforce a price over any type of a route. And F4A does not mention interstate trucking. It actually mentions intrastate trucking. So the heart of F4A, I would respond to you and say that legally you cannot. You cannot intercede in the transportation of freight. Now, how F4A, which is an intrastate bill, turned into this interstate bill, I really couldn't tell you, but this is how the courts have interpreted it over the many years.
We're not going to go on a political bent because that's not the topic of this show.
Mhm.
So, all right. So, what what happens? I mean, you talked about the lack of broker liability. as they're brokering trucks, they're picking the lowest cost carrier rather than the best for that.
Safest. Right.
Okay. So has this resulted in a larger number of crashes, things like that? So
Yes.
how's that affected the insurance industry?
So it's a great question. What it does when you have brokers naming the rates and pitting truckers up against each other, it incentivizes insurance fraud. How do you pay more wages to drivers? How do you pay mechanics and dispatchers and safety people and cameras, but you can't name your rates? There's a race to bottom mentality on freight rates. Well, if freight rates are going down and everything else is going up, how do you stay in business? You cheat. And that's what's happening in this industry today. You have a lot of bad chameleon carriers. 60 Minutes did a segment on this recently, the rise of chameleon carriers. My question is, who is feeding the chameleon carriers? Where are they getting the freight from? No one seems to be talking about that in this industry on any side. Where is the cheap freight coming from? It is coming from the brokers. And so, yes, it leads to larger crashes. It leads to all of that.
All right. So I want when you said I'm going to say ghost brokers, my brain kind of flipped to the news lately, at least in California and Minnesota, about these ghost uh
Chameleon carriers.
well, not chameleon cows, but in the
Oh,
hospice and other Medicare from Medicare fraud,
yes.
people putting up fake organizations
Yes.
and sucking money in.
Mhm.
Is that what is that same type of thing happening with brokers that
You
they're
know, I suspect, from dealing with truckers and hearing that there's a lot of overseas international brokers. You're legally not allowed to be established overseas and have a brokerage authority, but based on the accents on some of these brokers when they're calling and based on the grammar that they're using in these emails, they don't even seem to be based over here. They seem to be based overseas where it's much cheaper to pay somebody. And they are the ones that are pricing all of the freight in this country moving from one state to another and even intrastate.
wow. All right. So the Supreme Court rules for the brokers. What happens?
So there is a case going on in the Supreme Court that, again, a lot of people in the trucking industry are not aware of. It is the single most important court case in the history of trucking. It's called Montgomery versus Caribe Transport 2. And this was a case that was argued in March in the Supreme Court. There is a ruling that is expected in June. The facts of this case in 2017, a truck driver named Sean Montgomery in Illinois pulled over to the side of the highway to inspect an equipment violation. And while he was standing on the side of the highway, a driver for Caribe Transport 2 departed his lane at a high speed and struck the back of Montgomery's truck. Montgomery suffered severe medical issues. He had a leg amputated. He lost the ability to drive a truck, many, many hundreds of thousands, if not more, in medical costs. They sued Caribe and they got a policy limit claim on that. That's easy. But they also, the plaintiff attorney for Montgomery sued C.H. Robinson. C.H. Robinson brokered the load. It was a load of plastic pots. This went to court in Illinois. Illinois sent it to district court because the company that hit him was from Indiana, and the company that Montgomery was working for was Illinois. So two states, they figured this is a federal case. The district court ruled this cannot go to a trial because of F4A, because federal law preempts state law. You cannot go after a broker. They arrange for service. They're not the driver. They're not the trucker. All right. So they appealed that. And I don't remember if they appealed it. I believe it was the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals that they appealed this to. And the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals also agreed with the lower district court. You cannot sue a broker. Federal preemption, federal law preempts state law. You cannot push this through. The plaintiff attorney took this further to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed to hear this case. Now, the reason why the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case is it's an absolute perfect case for the Supreme Court. Many years ago, there was another case, and I'm drawing a blank on the name, but I believe it was Miller versus C.H. Robinson, very similar circumstances, 2014. And that case, same argument, same verdict. You cannot, F4A, federal preemption, but they appealed it to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Ninth Circuit of Court of Appeals actually overturned this. And the reason why that nothing ever happened with that is because C.H. Robinson settled the case. So for the Supreme Court, this is an absolute perfect case. You have two appellate courts, the Seventh and the Ninth, both saying different things. And when you have two appellate courts saying different things, that is the perfect case for the Supreme Court to come in and say what should be done.
Okay, so with the Miller versus Robinson, I know that was the Supreme Court declined to hear that in 2022, but that's because they dropped it. And in that case, they alleged that the broker had hired really crappy people with so and I can see why if somebody's hiring bad folk, why we'd want to sue them. So obviously, as part of the insurance industry, you would want to see the Supreme Court rule in favor of Montgomery, right?
Correct.
So what happens if Montgomery does win? How does that affect the industry?
It is a game changer for
How
trucking.
so?
Because all of a sudden, brokers are no longer picking the cheapest carrier. Now they know that they can be sued, as they should be. I'm not saying that brokers are all liable for everything that they do, but they certainly should be accountable. They're picking the truckers, who are in turn picking the drivers. If they win, if Montgomery wins this case, brokers are no longer picking the cheapest carrier. They're going to start looking at how many mechanics do you have? How many crashes have you had? If you have a scheduled auto policy, can you list all the VIN numbers in a certificate of insurance? I cannot tell you how many unscheduled trucks are on the road right now trying to stay in business because they're not naming the rates. In essence, if Montgomery wins this case, the truckers gain all the power. They begin to name their freight rates. They do it, not the brokers. And it's not going to say the brokers are going to go out of business. Brokers are going to be here. We need brokers. They're a huge part of the supply chain, but we need them to be accountable for who they hire. If you hire someone who has multiple safety alerts, if you hire somebody that is misclassifying their drivers, why should you not be able to get sued? And why should that case not go in front of a jury where a jury of 12 people can decide whether or not it makes sense to hold that broker liable and civilly liable for that claim?
So my brain says that if Montgomery wins and brokers are held to be liable, at least in certain, does this mean brokers will have to have malpractice insurance?
They would have to have not malpractice insurance, but they would have to have a required insurance. That's another ridiculous thing in our nation's supply chain. Trucking companies have to buy insurance for their trucks. There has to be an MCS 90 form attached to the policy. There has to be an electronic filing online. It is a public guarantee that whether your insurance policy pays this claim or not, if that insurance carrier puts up that filing and there is a claim for an unscheduled truck, the insurance carrier still has to pay the claim. They can go back after the trucker, subrogate the claim, but they have to pay it. Brokers have nothing. There's no required insurance for a freight broker. All you need is a $75,000 freight broker bond. In 2 weeks, you apply for a DOT number, MC number, freight brokerage authority. You get a $2,000 bond, if that, and you're off to the races. There's no insurance. So why shouldn't freight brokers be also required to buy insurance just like trucking companies are required to buy insurance? They're a part of the supply chain. They're picking carriers. It's absolutely absurd.
Okay, makes sense to me. So how, if let's assume Montgomery goes through, um, how will the general public feel it?
The general public generally has no idea what's going on our roadways. And I have a real burning belief here that if the public did understand how dangerous our roadways are in today's day and age because of the rise of freight brokers, there would be a huge public outcry. The idea that we are driving on highways next to tractor trailers that may or may not be scheduled on an insurance policy is pretty scary, and it's being fueled by this lack of broker accountability, where again brokers are just doing whatever they want to do, and if there's an accident they wipe their hands of it. We're a broker, we can't be responsible. Federal law preempts state law. So I think the public wants to see this happen. If they actually knew what was happening, I cannot see why the public would be against brokers also being accountable.
All right. So, and that makes sense. Obviously we've seen way too many horrific trucker crashes in the news.
Yep.
Some of them seem to be aiming at people.
Mhm.
So that makes sense. You referenced what I'll say fraud in the industry before. Will, if Montgomery wins, this should end up causing, I would assume, a reduction in fraud.
I would imagine so, yes.
So will the consumer see any price reductions because of this? Um,
I don't think the consumer is going to receive any price reductions. People may look at it and say, okay, if truckers are naming, or if their rates are going up, does that mean that consumers are spending more money? I can't connect the two of those things. All I can tell you is this: I think it's absolutely absurd that truckers are hauling freight for a cheaper rate today than they were doing 5 years ago, with inflation going the opposite way. Has a gallon of milk gone down in the last 5 years? Has a dozen eggs gone down? That's all gone up while the trucking companies' rates have gone down. So who exactly is benefiting from cheap freight rates? It's not the public, it's the brokers, it's the beneficial cargo owners, the importers, and the shippers that are making more money by hiring cheaper trucking companies. And I think that has really created a danger on our highways and all of our roadways.
okay. So now we're going to take a slightly off the wall question. We live more and more, and you can't swing, as I like to say, a dead cat without hitting something about it. But we live in the artificial intelligence age.
Yes.
How do you see that affecting the transportation industry and the insurance industry?
So without Montgomery being voted on, or being ruled on, I think AI is going to put a lot of dispatchers out of business in the next couple of years because AI is going to automatically connect loads with trucking companies. So it's going to be a lot more efficient. I think you're going to see AI adopted in automation in the ports. So we will see a lot of humans lose their jobs in the port. But I personally think that it should be done through attrition. I don't think that anyone should be losing their jobs to AI. I think as people retire, it's okay for AI to replace them. Think about the longshoremen in all of our terminals or 36 seaports. That's okay. But the idea that we're putting people out of work and replacing them with a robot does not sit well with me, and I don't think it sits well with a lot of the people in this country and this world.
See, to me, it's just a an attribute of something I've said for a long, long time. Artificial intelligence is no match for natural stupidity.
Yeah,
Um,
that's good. I like that. I'm gonna remember that.
I've always said one of the greatest tools for civilization, industrial civilization, was a stick of dynamite.
Yeah,
We created roads, things, all kinds of that. And would you put that stick of dynamite in every bozo's hands?
right.
No.
No, of
So
course.
enough on that. Won't go into that. Won't turn this into an AI chat. What's something that you want people in the industry to know that we haven't covered today?
I think that the most important thing is that we need truckers. Trucking is the most important industry on the planet. And the reason why it's the most important industry on the planet is because it touches everything. There is no one that does not rely on a truck. From the clothes that we wear, from the food that we consume. I'm sitting in an office right now with walls and carpeting and a ceiling and windows. All of these things were brought in by a truck. The computer that I'm on right now, all of it, the phones, everything. We need truckers. And we need trucking companies, if they're working so hard right now to deliver all of our nation's freight, and we need them to deliver medicine and hospital beds, why? Why should they be struggling so much right now in 2026, where everything is going up in price except for a trucking company's freight rate? It's utterly absurd. It's unfair, and it's a danger to all of us that are sharing the roadways with these companies.
Okay. Last question before we go out is how do people get a hold of you?
I don't know if you want me to publicize my phone number.
Whatever you want.
So if anyone wants to contact me, my cell phone number is 646-269-7397. You can also reach me an email at mike_edwards@ajg.com. It stands for Arthur J. Gallagher. I'm happy to take any calls or questions or inquiries. I love talking to truckers. I love talking to other insurance people or anyone in the supply chain whatsoever. It is a fantastic industry, and it's an honor to be here with you.
Awesome. So, folks, you got insurance questions? Get a hold of Mike. We thank him for being on this episode of Cargo Chronicles, talking insurance and Supreme Court cases. Pretty cool, folks. Be back again next week, hopefully, with a brand new topic. Safe
Thank
trucking
you,
all.
Fred.